Good morning. Welcome to our study this morning. We're continuing our series on the conscience, morality, and the spiritual life with lessons 43 and 44 this morning. We're currently in an Enneagram review, and today we'll review the power strategies of the 5, 6, and 7 in the Enneagram system, and we'll look today specifically at Enneagram types 5 and 6. As you know, we're using the Enneagram as a system of understanding human nature and how humans work, or I shouldn't say understanding, identifying human nature, the various aspects of human nature, and how human nature responds to life. The caveat that I've given, I think, at almost every lesson is that we're not endorsing the Enneagram as a system of understanding yourself and changing yourself, but as a system to identify the way we act, so that we can then put it into perspective with our study of morality and the alternative to moral living for the Christian, the spiritual life, the reservoir of righteousness that we receive at salvation, at the new birth. We'll begin our study, as is our custom, with a moment of silent prayer, so that if you need to, you may use 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So if you need to do that before the study, please take this opportunity as you pray with me. Father, as we study this hour, we ask for the Spirit's blessings in our endeavors to learn what we are like when we use these strategies to try to obtain some level of happiness in our lives, as opposed to using the reservoir of righteousness that you have provided to us for our joy, for the joy that you have, so we might share in that joy and have joy no matter what our circumstances are in life. We thank you for this time together. We ask that you bless those who are watching this via the internet, as well as those who are here. Again, we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. 1 John 2:15, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone does love the world, the love of the Father is not in them. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world is passing away, and the lust of it, but he who does the will of God abides forever. This verse is much misunderstood. It's one of those verses that is used to try to refute the eternal security that we have by nature of our new birth. It's one of those that if you love the world, the love of the Father is not in them. That's at a point in time. So at the moment, and again it goes along with the whole concept of 1 John 1:9, that you're either spiritual or carnal at any one moment. And in this case, he's explaining that with this verse, that when you love the world, the love of the Father is not in you at that time because you're out of fellowship with the Father. So then he goes on to explain amplify that all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, those areas of the sinful nature that we have seen, the temptation arenas, is not of the Father, but is of the world. So that we would recognize that, and of course that's the whole purpose of this study, is that all of these things that we're looking at as a means of understanding human morality is from one of these categories: lust of the flesh, sexual or chemical; lust of the eyes, materialism; pride of life, religion, power, and approbation. Those are the arenas in which we find all human happiness to try to be attempted to be attained within. And that's not of the Father, it's of the world, and this is how we will recognize it as we continue our study and look at these, and is the reason that we're using the Enneagram, because the Enneagram points out how mankind functions in human good and in human bad. So it's an excellent resource for us to be able to see ourselves and those around us in light of the human nature. HAM is an acronym for Happiness Attainment Motivators. These are the built-in desires for various types of human happiness: chemical, religious, approbation, materialism, power, and sex. These motivators are part of the genetic nature we inherit from our parents, their parents, and so on, all the way back to Adam, who started the process when he disobeyed God and ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This fruit genetically contaminated Adam to create what is commonly, in biblical nomenclature, known as the sin nature. However, this sin nature is really our human nature and is the source of these 6 hams. Note that what Adam ate was called the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The first thing we notice is that it was a fruit, a food, something he ingested. This food, probably safe for all other creatures to eat, had some quality that affected the human cellular structure, producing the genetic mutation that became known as the sin nature, which immediately separated man, at that time Adam and Eve only, of course, from God, as seen in their act of hiding from God. The second fact we see is that this mutation produced knowledge, a set of information to be added to the prior information base. Of course, their prior information base was solely Bible doctrine, the Word of God, who communicated with them every afternoon when he came down for Bible study. We immediately learned that this information base caused a change in the way they viewed each other, and they knew that they were naked. A sexually related awareness that produced a conscience-violating awareness, a knowledge that they were unacceptable to God. And finally, we note that this knowledge is both good and evil, not just sinful acts, as many teach, but a goodness as well, as evidenced by their attempt to clothe themselves to become acceptable. There was nothing, and we'll go through this again later in our studies, we'll take another look at the temptation and fall of Adam and Eve. But what we'll note when we do that is there was nothing they did there that we would classify as sin today. Nothing that we would classify as being a bad behavior, an immoral behavior. Everything they did was human good. They were attempting to placate God. They attempted to establish their own religion. They, of course, had the sexual awareness. They had all of these areas that were now part of their information base, part of their knowledge base, and their way of trying to adapt to it. This good is known to us today as morality, and this evil is known as immorality. Our topic in this study is the morality half of this sin nature, our human nature, and how each of the hams has its own set of morals, which we can identify as coming from the genetic mutation that separates us from God, so that we can reckon or consider ourselves dead to them. After grasping the fact that Christ died for our sins on the cross, the next most important doctrine we need to grasp is that he died to the sin nature, and we died to our sin nature with him on the cross. This is why we must be born again from above, why we must have a new nature, a different nature, receiving a spiritual nature to live in, so that we may abstain from the sinful nature desires, whether good or evil. One of the hams is approbation, the desire for recognition, respect, honor, or appreciation, and there are other descriptors for approbation. There are 3 basic Enneagram types that correspond to the approbation ham. And I've realized that probably what I should do here is not look at these individually as the two, but the two strategy, because at times we all probably use a 2 strategy. At times we all use a 3 strategy, at times a 4 strategy, and all 9 strategies at times we will use. And so I think it'll help us to get the idea that, well, I'm not a 2, so this doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. You use this strategy at times. The same strategy that is ascribed to the 2 in the Enneagram system is a strategy that we will use in certain situations. And I've been finding it quite interesting to identify them in my interrelationships with other people when I will do something and I'll say, well, that's a 5 strategy there. That's a That's a 7 strategy. That's a 9, whatever it happens to be. And be able to identify that and see that I use those strategies in different situations. So let's look at the approbation ham Enneagram types. The 2 strategy is the pleaser strategy. It seeks approbation by making you indebted by giving and helping you. It becomes prideful, resentful, and angry if you do not. The 3 is the strategy of overachieving, seeking approbation by being the epitome of the ideal person of whatever culture they are in. And the 3, of course, will avoid emotions. The 4 is the dramatic individualist, and they seek your approbation by being unique and not being the epitome of the ideal. They hold on to their tragedy, the reason they're different, the things that make them different. So the reason that they're not the 3, the perfect epitome of the ideal person. Another ham is power. This desire for security ranges from concerns of personal safety to domination. 5 is the strategy that's known as the observer, and they avoid power issues by avoiding interaction. They isolate themselves and their lives in their mind, where they have the power to control. You can control things if you are thinking about them. There are probably several of you amongst the thousands in attendance who can control your own dreams. There are about 10% of the population can control their dreams. So if your dream starts to go in a bad way, you can change it back and move it over into a different avenue. But we can control things when they're in our minds. We can eliminate them. We can amplify them. We can change them around in whatever way we want to. And that's the 5 strategy, is to think these things through and come out with a good response, a response that makes us happy, keeps us out of harm's way in these power issues. The 6th strategy is called the doubting loyalist, and they have a fear of having insufficient power in the circumstances of life. They seek security by being hyper-vigilant, and they always wonder, what if? What if this happened? What if that happened? You see that a lot in kids. What if a meteor came down and landed on? What if somebody jumped out from behind a bush? And it's part of their need as children to have control of their situation and their own safety. And it's a power, as power develops in the child, as their sense of being able to control their own environment and destiny, they'll use that, you'll see that kind of questioning come out, the what ifs. And the 6th strategy wants to avoid change because that's something new which could be dangerous to them. The 7 strategy is the experience seeker, and they seek the sense of power or the avoidance of the lack of power through endless outside experience. They avoid thinking and thrive on excitement to do so. They want to not think about what might happen because they can't control it in their minds. They're not the 5 type thinking person, and so they're not going to really want to think about it. They want to avoid it by constantly keeping busy and keeping the chemical stimulation in their lives so that they don't have to face their lack of control over some situation. A 3rd ham is religion, the desire to relate to absolutes such as God or right and wrong. There are 3 types in that grouping in the Enneagram. The challenger, the 8th type, his religion seeks to correct wrongs as he sees them with power by bullying others. He avoids feeling weak and denies being wrong. So this is the bully, but he's also known as the knight on the white horse because he wants to rescue. He wants to save people. That's part of his religious motivation in being happy. He thinks he can be happy by helping other people with their problems. So that's his way of trying to do it. You see these in all areas of life, from crusaders of various types in the area of morality, but you'll see them in many situations. The 9 is the peacemaker strategy. His religion seeks peace by avoiding conflict and dynamic situations. They are pleasant to be around, but they are passive-aggressive. The third type of the religious motivation is the 1. The 1 is the perfectionist. His religion seeks perfection internally and externally. He sees imperfections and tries to right them. He has to hold in his anger and therefore becomes tense. Pardon me. We've covered the earlier strategies, the approbation strategies, in prior lessons, and are currently on the 5, 6, 7 strategies, the power strategies. 5, 6s, and 7s are usually called fear-based types in the Enneagram system because their issue is control, power. Because as power-based, their inadequacy results in fear as their basic preoccupation. These diverse types of fear make quite different experiences of life, but all three live in varying degrees of terror, partially because they live from their head center. Everything relates to their thinking, either doing it or trying to avoid it. They think a lot and frighten themselves. They're not is an Enneagram term for being hung up on something not moving properly. Kind of like a cramp, the CRAMPSs. Their not is in their will. They have a variety of ways of not being able to take action in their world. These two characteristics, fear and thinking, come together via anticipation. The types in this center tend to approach life by limiting their life to what they can figure out. That's the 5 strategy. By preparing for any eventuality, the 6 strategy, or by avoiding thinking about what may happen in the future. That's the 7 strategy. The 5s try to be in control by gathering information, thinking everything through, understanding everything. 6s expect the worst to happen, so they spend a lot of time making sure they have thought of every eventuality. 7s don't expect things to work out very well, so they keep busy, deliberately not looking at whatever may be negative. This is a diagram here that I did a long time ago on the 5, 6, and 7 approaches to power. And I think we have our smartboard working again, so we should be able to handle it. This is the, see if I can look at them. This is the 5 type here. That it looks almost like a 6, doesn't it? It's a 5, and they try to control their situation by thinking. They want their environment to be safe because they have studied it and worked it all out. Right? And the 6 strategy is the one that something bad is going to happen. Something's going to go wrong. I'm going to get bad news. Stock market's going to crash. Somebody's going to get sick. My luck's going to go bad. Something's going to blow up in my face. I'm going to get bad news somewhere. And so they try to prepare for every eventuality by thinking of everything that could possibly go wrong in life. And then having a plan for it. And those who have been here for a number of years know just a prime example of that in someone who attended the church a number of years ago. And this person had a situation response for anything that could go wrong. Then the 7 strategy, they avoid thinking about everything. They don't want to think about it because they really don't know that they can handle it. Like the 5 knows that if I think it out, I can be in control of it. The 7 says, I'm not going to think about it because something's going to go wrong. So they want lots of activity, parties, sports, activities of all sorts, risks, things that they can do that will stimulate them and keep them from having to spend time thinking. So that's the diagrams there, and on your notes, of course, you have just a small version of this, so it probably doesn't show up too well on those notes. The people of the 5 personality type essentially fear that they don't have enough inner strength to face life, so they tend to withdraw, to retreat into the safety and security of the mind, where they can mentally prepare for their emergence into the world. 5s feel secure, comfortable, and at home in the realm of thought. They are generally intelligent, well-read, and thoughtful, and they frequently become experts in their areas of interest or concern. This is a very academic type. We covered some basic 5 information at the end of our study last week, and this is actually new information. It's not review. It's new in the sense that it's a new way of presenting it, but of course a lot of the information is the same because a 5 is a 5. While they are sometimes scientifically oriented, especially with the 6th wing, just as many 5s are drawn to the humanities, and it is not at all uncommon for 5s to have artistic inclinations. 5s are often a bit eccentric. They feel little need to alter their beliefs to accommodate majority opinion, and they refuse to compromise their freedom to think just as they please. The problem for 5s is that while they are comfortable in the realm of thought, they are frequently a good deal less comfortable when it comes to dealing with their emotions, the demands of a relationship, or the need to find a place for themselves in the world. 5s tend to be shy, non-intrusive, independent, and reluctant to ask for the help that others might well be happy to extend to them. They are striving to be detached. That's their striving in the Enneagram system. The desire to be autonomous, independent, and to be able to find serenity with your own thoughts. I just need to get away and think. Okay? That would be a 5 kind of strategy that we would have. I just need to get away. There's too much going on. I just need to be alone and just think things through. Their appraisal belief is that the world demands too much from me and gives me too little. Elie Wiesel says, ultimately, the only power to which man should aspire is that which he exercises over himself. That's a 5 strategy. I can have power over myself if I can just be alone. Okay? The love of liberty is the love of others. The love of power is the love of ourselves, says William Hazlitt. I thought that was another good quote. The love of liberty is the love of others. The love of power is the love of ourselves. Obviously true. The love of power as a strategy for happiness is part of our selfism, part of our selfish nature. In developing their self-concept, they learned to protect themselves from intrusive demands and being drained of my resources by becoming private and self-sufficient. The 5 does this by limiting their desires and wants and by accumulating a lot of knowledge. Most powerful is he who has himself in his own power, Seneca said. Let not thy will roar when thy power can but whisper, from Dr. Thomas Fuller. My positive self-concept as a 5 is this: my world is limited to what I have the power to control, my comfort zone of power, or my CZP, and that was actually, it's in your diagram there in the area of the 5. You'll see that CZP there in fine print. To keep that comfort zone of power to a limited arena so that I can control it. And I don't want those other things to come in. I do that by scholarliness, being knowledgeable, thoughtful, calm in crisis, being respectful, keeping confidences, dependability, and appreciation of simplicity. Their self-concept vulnerabilities, strong feelings, especially fear. See, emotions can't be controlled, so the 5 tries to avoid them, because that's not good to be out of control. They have to have this control. Feeling that people or circumstances are intrusive or demanding, placing me outside my comfort zone of power. Feelings of inadequacy and emptiness. See, if you feel inadequate, then it means you're not in control. And if you have this feeling of emptiness, it means that you are not controlling your environment, your internal thinking processes. The attribution part of their appraisal process I focus on the intellectual domain, facts, analysis, and compartmentalized thinking, intrusions or demands on me. Their appraisal attitudes, observing from a detached stance, learning all there is to know about a subject, thinking and analyzing in advance, dampening and reducing feelings, self-containment, withdrawing, conserving, maintaining sufficient privacy, boundaries, and limits are the positive attitude arenas. Negative self-concept triggers or their stress is failing to maintain sufficient privacy, boundaries, and limits. If I can't do that, then I'm not in control, and then they can get into other things. Well, if I'm not in control, then what's my next strategy? What am I going to do next? Because they're going to have to, when you're out of control in power strategy, so you have power, pardon me, and you're out of control in that, you feel out of control, where do you have to go to try to be content, to be happy? You have to go to one of the others. You have to go to sex, chemical, religious, approbation, or materialism. You got to go to one of those areas next. So you're going to go into, in the Enneagram system, they're going to go into one of those instincts, right? The subtypes. And the subtypes, as we know them, are approbation, materialism, that would be the self-preservation type, the social type, and what's the third type? Sexual, right? The sexual. So they're going to go into one of those areas when you don't feel like you're going to have power. Now, you may also have connection to a religious type, so you might go there. And it's possible that you might, in a 5's case, need some medication. You might have to go chemical, okay? Because we can't control my thinking, and I have this anxiety about it, then I can go and get some medication for it, okay? So when you're not in control in one area of your happiness attainment motivators, you've got to go somewhere else. And that's a key in understanding what we have and how we're functioning. Becoming fatigued is also a stress issue for them. Having desires and needs and wants that lead to dependency on others. That messes with your self-concept when you're a 5, because your whole self-concept is built around the fact that I'm in control and I don't need anybody else. I can control it myself. And then trying to learn everything there is to know before taking action is a stressor. There's just too much to know, and I can't learn it all. Therefore, something might be able to get through to me. Their temptation to emotional revolt is being considered factually incorrect. Don't tell them that they're wrong. Demands or intrusions, an overload of emotional input, not having the opportunity for enough private time to restore my energy. Those will lead to emotional revolt. My emotional revolt, self-containment and withholding, tension and disapproval with short bursts of temper. So 5's a very calm person, very withdrawn person, but you'll get very short bursts of temper when they're in emotional revolt. The subtypes are instincts. This is the 5's kind of their self-concept. I have a special relationship with my mind. If I've got my mind working, I'm in good shape. Okay? Subtypes are important because they often enable you to recognize yourself more easily, but even more so because they are the real source of juice or energy in your life. If you know your subtype, you'll soon see that when your subtype, often called the instinctuals by some of the major authors, is threatened in some way, you get a lot of energy. Your subtype changes the preoccupations, but not the major mechanisms of the type. So we're going to look at those different subtypes, those 3 subtypes that the Enneagram has found. Basically what the Enneagram system people found is that they found these 9 approaches, and where they really got them is really nobody really knows. That goes back to the Sufis, to the desert fathers of the church, to the Kabbalah. I mean, people, all different authors trace it back to somewhere. They don't even know where. But they found, the 9 types, but then they found, wait a minute, that doesn't explain everything. So then they came up with the subtypes, and we'll look at those 3 subtypes. The first one we'll look at is a combination, or what the Enneagram calls instinctual stackings, one on the other. And the self-preservation, which is predominantly materialism, with the social, which is approbation, is the first one we'll look at. In the average health range, this instinctual stacking is warm, friendly, and loyal. This is the good side. Right? In the healthy range, the average health range, the self-preservation social type is going to be warm, friendly, and loyal. They need their downtime and have no trouble spending time alone, of course. They actually value it very much. They feel an energy drain from people's demands on them. And this instinctual stacking is what is described in most Enneagram books as being the 5. The most notable and potentially frustrating thing about people of this type and subtype is the difficulty involved in getting really close to them. While they can usually handle themselves socially, they always hold back when it comes to intensity or intimacy in a relationship, which can frustrate a sexual subtype who wants to be intimate, wants to know your deepest secrets. So in a relationship, this would be the conflict there in a relationship. The others are aware that there is more going on beneath the surface, but it can't really be accessed. These 5s are masters at minimizing their needs. Even though they shy away from intense personal relationships, they often have a lot of intuition about others. They're smart people. Their detached level of personal involvement somehow brings objectivity to their insights. They can be the most practical of the instinctual stackings. Self-preservation, social. Self-preservation goes right in to the 5 strategy of control, and all they're doing is expanding their control from in my mind to my immediate environment, my nest, my home. Okay? That's the materialism aspect of it. But they have some social too, so they can get involved. Right? They can get involved with people, but very likely they will disappear during a social gathering. They'll say, "Where'd she go?" And people won't be able to find them. I don't know. Well, then you'll find them out on the veranda by themselves, just looking at the sky, looking at the stars, whatever, just being alone to kind of re-energize themselves. Their issues usually revolve around demands made on their time. This can become problematic in personal relationships. This subtype has an ideal vision of what a close or romantic relationship should be, but given their concerns for protecting their space and time and lacking the instinctual drive of a strong sexual instinct and energy just doesn't flow in that direction. Because this subtype is good at minimizing their needs, they can get along fine with few relationships or without a romantic partner. When with the social instinct second in the stacking, they generally do find friends or colleagues, and they may even be married, but the need to maintain their own time to pursue their interests is always a point of contention. Now we move to the self-preservation sexual subtype. Self-preservation is still first, but now sexual or intimate is second. Social is now third, and the neglected area. This subtype, like the self-preservation social, is more typical of the depictions of type 5. The self-preservational instinct accentuates the self-contained, withdrawing tendencies of the 5. 5s of this subtype love their time alone with a passion and pursue it more actively even than the other subtype of self-preservation 5. Although with the sexual instinct second, they often want to find time for intimates as well. So they will have a good friend that they can share with, but even then, they will still have to have that alone time. So they're the type that can be a good friend for years, and you rarely see them. You don't see them that much. But they're your great friend, best of friends. But you hardly see them that much because their first is that fiveness and self-preservation, that they just happy to be at home in their own little house with their own little mind. On the downside, the self-preservation sexuals have more disdain for people and little use for the social aspects of life. They want to be left alone, or they want to share their inner world with their intimates. The intensity of the sexual instinct is reserved for their intimates, and even there it is sporadic. The self-preservation energy gives this type a solid foundation and some degree of practicality. These fives, again, self-preservation sexual, are conflicted when it comes to experiencing and expressing emotions. They usually default to emotional repression and to detached intellectual analysis. This is a dynamic common to all fives, but with the self-preservation sexual instinct stacking, the balance of these forces is pretty precarious, and it seems as though the scales are being constantly adjusted one way or another. As the social instinct is the least developed, the social arena gets the drier, more intellectual approach almost by default. Now we move to the social first, self-preservation second. One might think that the energy of this subtype would be warmer and friendlier than that of the self-preservation social, but it doesn't usually present that way. Because the social instinct is dominant, these fives are much more aware of their role in the group. They are therefore more careful of their involvement with others. The social arena is more important and is invested with more energy, so these fives will pull up faster and harder into self-preservation mode if they should feel at all threatened. This will sometimes give others the impression of coldness. This subtype will center a lot of their intellectual interest around the workings of society, humanity, or spirituality. You see, they're expanding, but they're mostly expanding in their mind. Okay? They're not really involved so much outwardly. They are inwardly more involved with what's outside of them. This serves as their connection with people. By means of these abstract mental constructs, fives of this subtype feel a sense of belonging socially without having to be personally involved and invested. The healthier people of this subtype are the more they are able to integrate the mental constructs with their actual experiences. They can really be content to adopt the role of people watcher, but they do it from a closer and closer perspective. The social self-preservation five has a blind spot that revolves around the fact that they tend to convince themselves they can get along just fine in the observer role. It does feel safer to them. If they do have a few people relatively close to them, they can really strike a good balance between their need to withdraw and their need to connect to the larger social world. The social self-preservation is the most intellectual of type 5. The combination of the basic desire for knowing with the social instinct's need to fit in makes people of this subtype want to find a niche as an expert. Their interest in structure, especially social structure, accentuates their natural inclination for acquiring knowledge. With the sexual instinct least developed, they're social first, self-preservation second, and sexual is the neglected, this subtype is in the position of having a strong pull towards understanding the workings of the world around them without the emotional intensity of the sexual instinct setting up any distraction. These fives fit the role of the scientist or professor quite well in this respect. This is the professor type. Now we go to the social sexual. And when reasonably healthy, people of this subtype can be very engaging for a 5. They're not. 5s aren't that engaging, but this is, they're 4 or 5, they can be very engaging. They smile a lot and are often friendly. Their energy is quite different from the social self-preservation subtype because both the social and sexual energies push outwards, and so partly balance out some of the withdrawing tendencies of the 5. This doesn't mean that people of this subtype are necessarily any healthier, however. The outgoing energy is not the result of true integration to 8, which would be the healthy Enneagram movement that they talk about, but is the result of the compulsive pull of the instincts. People of this subtype are usually warm, and when feeling secure, are likely to let people in and even to initiate contact. When they feel insecure, however, they can actually go to the other extreme and be very shy. For this reason, people of this subtype could easily be mistyped. Those 5s who withdraw from social contact because of feelings of insecurity might not seem like social subtypes at all. It might not be obvious that they actually very much desire contact. For people of this subtype, the social instinct actually works as a release valve, it should be valve there, for the sexual component. When relaxed and comfortable with others, the sexual instinct can easily be seen. The social sexual subtype of 5, when relaxed and comfortable with others, the sexual instinct can easily be seen. I know that none of you go to these kind of parties now, but in your past, when you went to those kind of parties, relaxed and comfortable with others, think drinking, okay? Think a person who has a bit to drink, and people will say the next day after a party like this, wow, I never had seen that side of them before, okay? Never seen that side of them before. It's the person who's wearing the very nice dress suit, a woman with a nice dress suit on, and when she has a little bit to drink, you know, the black rim glasses come off, and the hair gets pulled down so it's hanging, you know, instead of up in there, up on top of their head, and their jacket comes off. Those kind. That's gives you a visual idea of movies or even parties you may have attended. That the person gets relaxed and comfortable with others and the sexual instinct comes out. People of this subtype are very aware of how they fit in and also experience the sexual drive of wanting to connect with intimates. Like other social sexual subtypes, they have the tendency to cultivate many relationships. They want to be liked by everyone, but being 5s, they also tend to hold a part of themselves back for fear of rejection or of being overwhelmed by the demands of the relationship. Okay? Now, fear of rejection means what? Some approbation in there. Okay? The overwhelmed by demands of the relationship, that's the power issue. So you can see that social sexual is certainly going to have some approbation tendencies, because social is what? Whoops. Social subtype is what? Approbation, okay? Approbation of a group. They want the group to like them, all right? Now, that's social. And then the sexual, how do I get rid of that? Huh. The sexual is what? Sexual. But part of sexual looks like approbation too, right? Because you want that one person, that intimate personal relationship. The social sexual subtype of 5 is more likely to fear rejection than the other subtypes of 5. See, a 5 generally, I suppose, especially a 5 self-preservation, they don't worry about rejection because they're not going to get close enough to be rejected anyway. So they will more likely fear rejection than the other subtypes of 5 because both of the dominant instincts are focused on people or approbation. Any failure in the realm of interpersonal relationship triggers a fear that there is no safety in the world. Okay? So that this is a real threat to a 5 in their power, control, thinking processes, that have this social and sexual subtypes, because social sexual, that wants to go outward to other people. 5 wants to control it inside. So it really creates a conflict. And when that conflict shows up, then they have that real fear, and then they're the ones that you'll say, whatever happened to so-and-so? I haven't seen them for weeks. They used to come, every Wednesday night. They'd come to the restaurant and eat with us. Everybody get together and eat together, and they'd all show up. They'd always show up, but we haven't seen them for a while. Where are they gone? Well, something triggered their fear of control, and so they withdrew and are no longer being very social. Personality systems like the Enneagram function as a tool to help this subtype of 5 to feel safe in the world. But reliance on the spiritual resources found in the reservoir of righteousness is the appropriate response for the believer in Jesus Christ. You don't worry about trying to feel safer because you understand yourself, but because you are a different creature and you don't have to deal with trying to understand yourself as a means of feeling better, as a key to knowing that you have to get out of your human desires. The desires of the flesh are happiness. And you need to get out of those human desires and into your reservoir of righteousness of your spiritual life. Social sexual subtypes of 5 tend to think that the more they understand people, the less chance they have of being rejected. This tends to be a blind spot for people of this subtype, as they don't see that what will actually help them become healthier is gaining more life experience, to being out more. That's the human viewpoint. This will help them to see that their world will not come to an end with a little rejection. Now we move to the sexual self-preservation. Sexual self-preservation. What do you think of immediately when I say sexual and self-preservation together? What's this person going to be like? From all of the previous 3 that we've seen, examples of sexual self-preservation, what are you thinking? Sexual self-preservation. Sexual is what? Intimate relationship, subtype. Self-preservation is what? My immediate surroundings, my home, my possessions that I feel are mine, and of course the 5 I can control. Okay? This subtype has a lot in common with self-preservation, sexual instinctual stacking, of course, because they're just reversed. They experience many of the same internal conflicts surrounding relationships, the need for independence and emotional expression. The sexual self-preservation subtype differs, however, in being more intense, more counterphobic, getting out instead of hiding behind your fears. They entertain more dark nihilistic ideas. What are dark nihilistic ideas? A doctrine holding that all values are baseless and that nothing can be known or communicated. Rejection of all distinctions in moral or religious value, and a willingness to repudiate all previous theories of morality or religious belief. The belief that destruction of existing political or social institutions is necessary for future improvement. Okay? So I'll bet you that if you did a survey of all of the people you know that were Christians, that were believers at one point in time, who have become atheists, you will find a lot of sexual self-preservation 5 in them. Okay? Very intellectual people, but they'll have this sexual self-preservation subtype. They'll have these nihilistic ideas that they reject religious moral values and belief systems, and they believe and they become what we would call a liberal. That the destruction of existing political or social institutions is necessary for future improvement. Okay? Or in today's terminology, I guess you could be a Tea Partier if you think that destruction of existing political or social institutions is necessary for future improvement. Just a little contemporaneous joke there. Sexual self-preservation fives tend to forge strong connections quickly and deeply, but if they feel betrayed, begin to feel overwhelmed, or if they feel that the connection doesn't serve their true needs, can seem to cut the connection precipitously and go cold. Go cold. Cold is a thing about fives. They can be seen as being cold. They have high standards for significant others. They must feel that they can share their emotions with a significant other without being judged. See, emotions are a hard thing for a five. And so if they're going to share them with an intimate person in their life, they don't want to be judged, because that raises that stress level that I need to control my emotions and I can't control them. And this is their private world that they share. Sexual self-preservation 5, relationships can be difficult because individuals of this subtype will still want their own space and alone time, while at other times will want intense connection. Because the social instinct is least developed, this subtype is not very concerned with how others perceive them, except for their intimates. This subtype is deceptive in that they may not seem to be especially intense until they are engaged in a conversation they find interesting, something that they have control over because they have a lot of knowledge about it, see? Then the intensity and emotion become apparent. The internal struggle for this subtype is similar to that of the self-preservation sexual, but more energized and volatile, and getting to know this subtype means getting to know that. When unhealthy, the energy of the sexual instinct can combine with the dominant type 5 fixation to create a very impulsive 8-like anger. The strength of their convictions can then come out quite forcefully. This looks like a good place to take a break, both by the clock and where we are in our notes, before we pick up with the next subtype of the 5. So let's close with a moment of prayer, and then we'll take a 10-minute break and get back at 11:05. Father, we're grateful for this time together. We're grateful that we can see our human nature expressed in the study that we're doing today, so that we can understand where we have power issues in our own lives, so that we can understand that power is yours, that power is not from us, but from you, and that reliance on you, by focusing on you for intimacy in our lives, will produce in our reservoir of righteousness your power to be able to handle any situation in which we find ourselves. We thank you for this in Jesus'